Chapter 3 Zoey. The way you're behaving, all nervous and looking around, you don't want to leave this bar. What is it? She said. I wrinkled my forehead and gave a closed smile. Oh, I know. You met someone. I can tell. You can't fool me, Terry said in a low sing-song voice. That brought on a large smile. I rarely smile as wide as I am doing now. No. Not really. I twirled my hair like a little girl who had just met the boy of her dreams, but I saw him for a few minutes and I'm hoping he comes back. He looks like the kind of man I would like. Like? We don't have time for like. Like takes too long. You need one you could fuck, she said. Please, someone will hear you, and there's more to life than fucking, I mouthed, looking around. Who's going to hear me? And this crowd doesn't care who you fuck or if you use the F-bomb 100 times. It goes with the territory. Look around you. Nothing but desperate men and women. Why else would they come to a bar on a weekday? They're looking for the same thing we are. Someone to take us through the night and make life worth living. I threw my hands up, closed my eyes, and gave way to her absurd logic. Just one more drink. Please. I raised my hand to the bartender and Terry spiked it down. I'm leaving now. You can come if you want or drive my car back. But I'm leaving with that hot guy, and she waved at him and he smiled back at us. We can't wait around here hoping this man comes back. I bet you didn't even try to talk to him or give him your number. She didn't wait for me to respond because she knew, and I knew she was right. Zoey, why would he come back? He's probably fucking someone else at this time. You missed your chance, she said, shaking her head. You know what they say, when you're slow you blow. Maybe I didn't use that in the right context. But I'm turning around, and I'm walking out with that hunk, and you're not going to ruin it for me. I'm going to wiggle my ass over to him before he decides to leave. Terry turned and waved and strutted in the blonde guy's direction with a smile on her face, and I followed with a scowl. The blonde opened the door and Terry and I walked through, and when we were outside, Terry stopped and turned to make sure he was behind us, and no woman had snatched him. He trailed behind us until we were in the dark, away from a street lamp, and then he caught up and placed his arm around Terry's shoulder. Where is your ride, handsome? She asked. He pointed to a black Porsche Carrera. OMG, Terry leaned in and whispered to me. I found a good one. No more cheap piazzas for us. Where is your ride? He said to Terry, and she pointed to her piece of valuable junk. Since we both have small cars, then you should ride with me, Terry. He knew her name. And Zoey, you drive Terry's car back to your apartment. He had a commanding tone to his voice, which he didn't have before. He appeared to be used to being in control of women. How did he know my name? I hoped Terry didn't discuss my life with him. I warned her about letting strange men know all about us. But of course, she had to have said something. Despair overtook me at the thought that she could have discussed my childhood. I hoped she wasn't that careless as to reveal what happened to me when I was 5 years old. I didn't want anyone to know about that. I was just accepting it myself. I think we should ride together. I don't drive that well, I said to Terry. I needed to know how much she told that stranger, and I didn't trust him. It was something about him. Oh, he was likable enough and extremely handsome, but then so are some serial rapists and killers. Terry and the blonde glanced at me. It was as if I had committed murder. They appeared to be hot for each other, the way she was leaning her hips into him, and he was holding her too close. I was the only one standing in their way. They didn't say anything to me, and I kept walking to Terry's car, which had been parked in the dark a block away. When I reached the car, I turned and Terry and the blonde were grinding against each other and kissing. Terry appeared to be taking the lead. She had both hands on his butt and squeezing it. and then I watched as he grabbed her by her neck with both hands and licked the side of her face, only stopping at her neck. It looked embarrassing, and it was as if I was watching a dirty movie, with the loud sucking coming from him, and moaning and groaning coming from Terry. The blonde had one hand around her neck, and he began kissing her breasts through her shirt, and then her hands dropped to her side, and it looked as if she was being held up by his large hands. Her body became limp when his mouth moved back to her neck. With the darkness and the shadows, I wasn't sure of what I was witnessing, so I strode in their direction to see what had happened to Terry. It was so strange and eerie, I didn't know what to think. I hollered at her, "Terry, I think I'll drive the car back and you and your man can have time together." She didn't respond or turn to answer me, and as I walked closer, the blonde raised his head and I saw blood dripping from his mouth. "What are you doing to Terry?" I wanted Terry to turn and give me a snarky remark. I stood looking at him, and he never reacted except to hiss at me and place his mouth on her neck. I stayed on that one spot watching as he appeared to be feeding on her. I must have been in shock. I had never seen anything the likes of that before. Terry's body looked small and white, as if she was shrunken, and when he let go of her, what was left of her body cascaded down to the ground like a wrinkled bedsheet. Her face pale and her eyes closed. All I could say was, "What the fuck? What did you do to Terry?" I pivoted around and began running. And in a second, the blonde was standing in front of me with a strange look in his eyes. His eyes were no longer gray, but icy and glaring at me mercilessly and cold. Then they flashed red to match the blood dripping down his mouth. I don't know where the scream came from, but I opened my mouth and nothing came out but a muffled, weak cry for help. But someone heard me. When I turned, the man from the bar, the one I saw staring at me, the one I thought so handsome, was standing between me and the raving lunatic who had just killed my friend. There was no doubt about that. Terry was dead, and I was standing afraid to move and shivering, and ready to pee on the spot like a scared puppy. "What are you doing here?" I heard a soft, cold voice ask the blonde killer. "Vesper wants to see you. Tell him I'm not coming back. I'll never go back." "But you have to," the blonde insisted with emotionless patience. "You know how he hates to wait for anything. That's why he sent me for you. He should have sent someone who could bring me back, not you. Remember the last time you came for me, I took pity on you. This time I won't," the cold voice said. "This time you won't have to, because this will be the end of this, and our father won't have to worry about you any longer," the blonde said, flexing his hands. And the blonde rushed to the cold voice, and they gripped each other by the shoulders. They stood looking into each other's eyes for a moment. Then there was a gnashing of the teeth, and sound of hissing like a snake would before it struck. When they pulled apart, they rushed at each other with closed fist and pounded each other in the chest. Neither one affecting the other, nor gaining any ground. When one would land a blow, it was as if the thunder had struck, and the sound rumbled through the street. When the cold voice struck the blonde in his chest, the sound and reaction were that of lightning. It was quick, it was hot like blue fire, and it was deadly. I saw the blonde slump forward, but then, like someone had poured water on a dead plant, he rose and attacked the cold voice as he walked to me, spinning him around. I stepped back away from the cold voice, trying to get away from them both. They fought and pummeled and beat each other and whirled around as I stood in one spot, unable to move, and unable to speak. I didn't have the good sense to move out of the way of a freight train, and that freight train of two strong, powerful beings came rolling in my direction, and I saw the pain in the cold voice's eyes when he knew he and that killer blonde would hit me like a bullet from the barrel of a gun, sending me sailing into the front of that chrome bumper of that little indestructible car. Chapter 4, Zoey. I'm waiting for Terry to come into the room and tell me she or I won the lottery. Why else would I be in a place like this? The room is bare, just a bed and one dresser with no mirrors, but it's elegant with heavy silk off-white drapes. If I were to guess, I'd say whoever decorated this room was a minimalist, so that rules out Terry because she's the bag lady of Seattle. There wasn't an old couch she couldn't pass up, or a broken table lamp she didn't need. By the process of elimination, I ruled out that this was my place or Terry's. Then who is it? And where am I? I tried to stand and my weak legs wouldn't cooperate. I held onto the bed as the room moved around and around. Not wanting to fall and cause another injury to my body, I planned to get to the nearest wall and try to make my way to the door. I touched my head, and it had a bandage wrapped securely around it. Then it came back to me. Something had happened to Terry. Tears welled in my eyes and then fell hard on my cheek when I realized she had died that night. When I remembered how she looked when that thing got a hold of her, all I could think about now was, I warned her about strangers. It was a stranger who had befriended me when I was a child. It was a stranger who took me and brainwashed me where I no longer knew who I was. Now it was a stranger who saved my life. But from whom and why? What kind of dangerous world had I found myself in? I'm remembering now. The stranger knew that blonde. He said something about father, so that would make him his brother. Searching around with my eyes, what happened to him and where am I? I concentrated and put my legs down and managed to step out of bed. I had to do it. I couldn't stay there forever waiting until someone came. I put one shaky, weak foot in front of the other and held on to the side of the bed trying to make my way to the door. It appeared so far away. And I was so weak. Then I looked down, and I had on a gown. A white gown. Not the kind they give you in a hospital, but a gown if you're going on your honeymoon kind of gown. My hair had grown long, but it didn't appear unkempt. Someone had tended to me and groomed me. Cut my nails, but didn't take off the nail polish. Looking at my nails, I came to the conclusion I had been here a month or more. Pulling at my hair and running my hand over my face, it appeared I had to have been here maybe 2 months. In a coma? I questioned. But how could I stay here so long, and no one came for me? I managed to finally get to the door and touch it, and then open it. I looked out at the stairs that led to the downstairs foyer, and out the door. How am I going to get down those stairs? I wondered. I turned around looking at a series of closed doors, but there was one that had the door ajar. I hobbled to it, holding onto the wall for support. When I reached the door, I pushed it open, and in the large room, there sat a large grand piano and paintings hung on the walls. Old masters and books and newspapers were strewn everywhere. And then I spotted it. A computer on the desk in a corner. I stumbled over to the computer, sat in the chair and turned it on. When it came up, there was a news bulletin. Still no sign of Zoey Miller. I continued reading for my own interest. I wanted to shut down the computer, but my curiosity wouldn't allow me. Zoey Miller has a long history of being kidnapped. It started when she was just a child. At age 5, she had been abducted and presumed dead after years of her parents and Detective Cole leading the search for her. She showed up in England at the age of 15 with no memory of what had happened to her. Zoey's family got all the help she needed, and she appeared to be adjusting nicely where she went on to college and was due to graduate this fall. However, another unfortunate incident occurred. From what we can piece together, she disappeared outside of a club with her roommate. No signs of her or the roommate since. I clicked the arrow and a video came up. The detective, Ryan Cole, who handles my case, a young-looking man in his late 20s with light brown hair and a handsome face, spoke about my kidnapping into the local news cameras. I was just a teen when I heard of the kidnapping of a young child by the name of Zoey Miller. I will never forget this case. It defined my life from that day forward. I knew then I wanted to be a policeman and solve the case of these missing children. I will not rest until I find out who took her. He looked directly into the camera. Whoever you are and wherever you try to hide, I will track you down and I will find you. There aren't enough holes for you to hide in, and you can be sure that I will be there. Detective Ryan Cole turned without answering any questions and walked away. Clearly he was upset. I recognized him as one of the men who brought me home from England. He comforted me through the 12-hour ride into New Jersey, and then on the flight to Seattle. That was 6 years ago. And now he's searching for me again. Finally, I sat up not knowing how to feel. I couldn't feel. I just stared at the computer hoping this wasn't my life they were writing and talking about, but it was me, Zoey Miller, and I were going through another nightmare. Terry is dead, I kept mumbling. It was true because I saw her die, and I saw the terrible fight that had ensued between the blonde and the cold voice. I wondered who had won and who I would belong to next. It was as if I was reliving my childhood once again. But my childhood was something that I knew little about. It was as if someone erased it from my memories, and I started to live again at age 15, when Detective Cole returned me to my parents. Have you read enough, and have your questions been answered? Jumping with fright, I glanced up when I heard that cold voice again, and I turned with a jerk to my left. Standing in the doorway was a man in his early 20s. Now I could see him clearly. His hair dark and his eyes blue with green specks. Suddenly his eyes took on a warmth that hadn't been there before, but the sadness prevailed in his face. His face spoke of beauty and power, and his body spoke of strength. He stood tall, dressed in a black sweater and black slacks. His shoulders wide, his arms long with large powerful hands. "It's you," I said with relief burning through me. I let out a sigh and breathed through my teeth. "You saved my life." His mouth barely opened, but fell into an unconscious smile. His teeth white and dazzling, but I felt angry and uncertain about what I remembered about him and what I had heard. "Your brother killed my friend. Why didn't you come sooner, and she would have been alive?" I said, pounding on the desk. "Do you want to know? If I tell you, you will never be able to go back home or be the same person again." "Yes, I want to know, and I will be able to go back home. There's a detective looking for me. He will not rest until I'm found," I said, looking up at the cold voice with the beautiful white teeth. It was the first time I had seen a man as handsome as the one before me. I couldn't control my feelings for him, and it showed on my face. There was a sudden flush of heat causing a blush on my cheeks, which gave me away. "Don't do that. When your temperature rises, you give off a scent, and I can't control myself." "Control yourself from what?" "I said you don't want to know, and you shouldn't. It's too soon." "When do you think I should know?" "When another one of your family members come to kill me. I think it has to do with my kidnapping when I was a child." Tilting my head and locking eyes with him, I watched closely at his face when I made that statement. I thought maybe I could read something in his gestures. He showed no expression. All I saw was satisfaction and peace. He just looked at me the way a man looks at a woman when he loves her. But how could that be? I had never laid eyes on him until that night at the bar. "Your father has a ring where he kidnaps children and then brainwashes them or keeps them drugged where they can't remember anything?" This was like a shot in the dark, hoping to hit something what I didn't know. I was probing to get a reaction. "No. It's not that," he said with a furrowed brow. "Then tell me. Tell me why I'm here." He gazed at me with those sparkling pool of bluish eyes and stone face. "You're here so I can protect you." "From what?" What the fuck are you trying to protect me from, if it isn't from a kidnapping ring? Now isn't the time to tell you. And you shouldn't curse. His tone flat but with authority. Why do I care what you think? But I did care. You're the one breaking the law by keeping me here. The police would protect me from your family. I knew throwing the police out there was a waste of time, because after a few years they gave up on me and considered me dead. That's why when I showed up with Detective Cole, my family didn't believe I was Zoey Miller. My father said that the police had evidence that I had died. I had to take a DNA test to prove who I was. Detective Ryan Cole was the only one who didn't stop looking for me, and he knew who I was when my own mother and father didn't. You need something to eat. You've been in a coma for months. I fed you intravenously. How many months? Months. And he walked to me and pushed the chair around, and with one quick move he had me in his arms and carrying me to the room with the bed. I glanced up at him, and I felt happy and secure for the second time in my life. The first time was with Detective Cole, on our long trip to Seattle. Because of my separation from my family at a young age, I always felt vulnerable and in danger from everyone. But now I feel that I will be safe, as long as the cold voice is around. I glanced up at him as he laid me gently down on the bed. What's your name? I asked. He glanced down at me as if he didn't want to answer. He pulled the sheet up to my chest and said, You're going to get sick. I can't have you sick. Why not? I shouted. It was my angry voice that no one paid attention to but my cat. Then I remembered there were cats in our apartment depending on us to feed them, and to snuggle up with them at night when it was cold. What happened to my cat? And Terry's cats? My name is Sabastian, he said, his voice hoarse but reassuring. Cats are not like helpless little girls. They don't need anyone to protect them or feed them. How do you know? Have you ever had a cat? You look like you could put fear into animals. I bet you never had an animal when you were a child, I shouted with a weak voice which broke each time I uttered 2 words. He stopped walking and watched at me a few seconds, and then gave me a small grin, and then he strutted with his long legs out of the room and closed the door behind him. I lay there upset and wondering why I can't remember anything before I turned 15. Was I raped? No. When the police found me wandering the streets, they took me to a hospital and had me checked out. What was the purpose of them kidnapping me and leaving me intact, unless they had another reason, but I can't remember that. The ordeal left me frightened and afraid of strangers. At some point, I didn't want to go outside after my mother died. My father said that the stress of me being kidnapped took its toll on my mother and weakened her heart. She cried night and day until that detective brought you home, he had said to me. After time passed and my father convinced me that I could have a life, I was able to go on to college. I must have been taught by someone, because I had no problem passing tests, and my IQ was above average for my age. It wasn't like I was a child genius because I wasn't. That's why someone had to teach me, and I wondered who it was. Somewhere in between the wondering and trying to remember my childhood, I fell asleep. Then I woke when I smelled a bowl of soup. Eat. You have to get your strength. We have to leave here soon. I reached for the spoon and a large bowl of chicken soup. After taking several spoonfuls of noodles and chunks of chicken and eating like a starving man marooned on an island, I took a breather. Did you cook this? I warmed it. I don't cook. So it came out of a can? Yes. Do you expect me to eat canned food and gain my strength to leave here? I glanced up at him. I slanted my head after shoving a mouthful of noodles in my mouth. Did you say we have to leave here soon? I don't know where here is, and why would I leave with you? I have to contact my father so he doesn't worry about me. You can't contact him until you are out of danger. If you contact anyone, they will find us and kill us. I sat up in bed, my eyes wide, chills running through me, the roots of my hair blazing as if I had a fever. Kill me. Why does your family want to kill me? I won't tell anything. I don't know anything. I was a child. It's not what you don't know. And our deaths will be completely different. Death is death. You don't exist anymore, I said, not knowing what I was saying. What did I know about death? I'm 21, and I haven't had children yet. My life was just starting, and now this person is talking about death. He's maybe 23 if a day. Death is not death. There are different degrees of death. Yours will be different than mine. You will no longer feel. You will be cold the way I am. You aren't cold. You have feelings. I know it. I feel your soul. It's as if I know you. There is no way for you to know me. He raised one eyebrow. Now eat and get well. I touched his hand and he pulled it away. Immediately he stood and looked down at me. His forehead furrowed, as if he didn't want any part of me. Then why was he taking the time to protect me and make sure I lived? His hand cold to the touch. Is that what he meant? I meant something different. I meant that he had feelings. He wasn't cold like a snake or lizard. He pulled his hand from mine, as if being next to me would sear his skin. I know I ran hot sometimes more than the normal human, but that was no reason for him to have that reaction to me. Reading my body language and surprised expression, Sabastian softened. He put his hand on my forehead. Your body is too warm. You must have a fever, he said. See, you're getting sick. Don't get out of bed unless I tell you, his voice warm, but his tone full of authority. He walked to the door and paused, staring at the door, waiting for me to reply. I didn't want to disappoint him, so I said, my body temperature is always higher. My mother said when I was a child, I felt as if I had a constant fever. But that was the way I was. Not everyone is alike. Look at you. You're pale, and every time you've touched me you feel cold. Sabastian listened for a few, and he slanted his head to the side, shook his head and walked out after closing the door behind him. I gulped down the food, but I wasn't going to lie in bed when I needed some answers. I needed answers about him and me, and he wasn't cooperating. When I glanced outside, it was still dark, and I could see nothing but trees all around. I heard birds and I knew it wasn't a dream, or I had died. Since I recognized beyond a shadow of a doubt that I was indeed alive, a sense of relief crept over me, but that knowledge didn't make me happy, but being around Sabastian did.